So buy, borrow, die. What exactly is this? How does it work? And does it actually make sense? Some of you guys are going to love this, and some of you guys are going to be like me and say, I actually don't want to complicate my finances more than they actually are, and I don't want to take on all this risk. So in this video, I'm going to try to be unbiased and just tell you things as they are, so this way you can actually make your own decision for yourself. And as always, guys, like this video on top of also subscribe, hit the bell, shit notified. Now, by the way, it's not an easy strategy, but there are some benefits here. With the strategy, you get to save a bunch of money on taxes, for sure, because whenever you borrow money, you will not be taxed on it whatsoever. So the overall idea with buy, borrow, die is very simple. In reality, you're buying assets, you borrow against those assets, you use that money for whatever you want to use it for, and then you pay back, right? But instead of having to sell that asset and get taxed, well, you never sell it because you just borrow against it and you pay back, and there is no tax on that. And usually, sometimes in real estate, when you actually borrow money and so on, and you pay interest, you get to save even more money on taxes. Now, you might be asking me, Tommy, all right, this sounds interesting, right? Because you have to buy, then you borrow, then you die. Well, but why would someone that's wealthy actually want to do this? Well, let's just use for an example here, okay? Let's say I have $1 million in stocks, right? And there is this property I actually want to buy within like real estate, right? And it costs about $500,000. Now, I don't have any money. So I could, for example, go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to sell $500,000 worth of stock to buy that, but then I'll be taxed with capital gains tax, right? That's the whole idea. But instead, if I actually go ahead and borrow against those stocks, I can grab that $500,000 I basically borrowed, buy the property, and then have my tenants pay me and use that money to pay back the loan I basically grabbed from my stocks, right? And that way, I never basically had to sell anything whatsoever. That's the core idea. Or I could buy the property and then refinance, grab that money, pay back the loan, boom, I'm done, right? That's the idea. Now, there are 3 phases here, so let's go into each phase little by little, right? So you have the buying phase, which, by the way, has to be the hardest, because basically when you start to buy assets. Now, very simple here. When you start buying asset, it's important you consider which asset are you going to be potentially buying. You know, real estate takes a little longer. It's a lot harder, right? And on top of that, it's a little bit less illiquid in a sense, but you do build in equity. You can get lines of credit against it. And on top of that, you can basically just refinance whenever you actually want to, if you have any equity left in, okay? So that's one benefit. Or you could use the stock market. In the stock market, you could basically have stocks, you could basically have ETFs, mutual funds, and you can always just get, for example, a margin loan on your investment. Now, that's where you actually get into, for example, the borrowing phase. But before I get there, let's say, for example, you've been investing, let's say $1,000 every single year. Now, we know that's about $12,000, right? Every year. Now, okay. Now, for example, let's say you've been investing $1,000 a month for about like 10 years or so in the stock market. So after 10 years, that money is about $210,000. Now, let's say you actually want to buy a property that costs about $100,000, right? Like less than half of what you have right now. So then you go into the borrowing phase. Now, if you're doing stocks, you're doing margin loans. If you're gonna do, for example, you're gonna take a margin loan against your stocks, right? That basically means you're gonna grab this loan, like for, usually you get like 30% or 50% of the value of your portfolio, because they want to make sure if your portfolio drops in value, they can basically quickly sell what's left over and recoup the money to pay off the loan, okay? That's what they call a margin call. So in reality, let's say I take half the money I have in my portfolio. So that's around $105,000. I use that money to buy the home, pay all the costs or whatever. Now I have an option here, right? I can have the tenant pay me and I can use that money to pay back the loan, or I can basically refinance the property, grab that cash and pay back the margin loan, right? But there is interest associated with the margin loan, and that's based on the Fed rate. So right now it's about 9% to 11%, which is what's happening right now. But you can actually get them at 2% or 5%. You could get them like that in the past, but like not right now, okay? But that's the idea. Now, what's the risk here? Risk is, okay, let's say you borrowed half of your portfolio and your portfolio goes down by 30% or 40%, you're going to get a margin call. They will say, hey, you have to put in more money, like buy more stock to be able to like average it out, because at this point we're taking on a risk. If your stock loses more value then we basically lend you money, we run the risk of not being able to recoup our money. So you have to buy more into the stock, or you have to sell, for example, and basically pay them. Okay, that's the idea. Or what they basically do is basically they say, hey, at a certain point we're just gonna grab all your stock and we're gonna sell it and get our money back, okay? And then whatever's left over is yours, or sometimes you don't have anything left over. That's what they call a wipeout. That's the risk there. Now there is another risk, right? And the risk is, okay, let's say you actually did this with real estate. Again, the borrowing phase. You bought real estate is paid off. Let's say this property is worth $500,000. You want to buy another property that costs, for example, $250K. You get a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, or you basically just refinance. You grab that money, you buy that property. Now that tenant can basically be paying you, so you can pay the money you borrowed, or you could refinance that property and basically get that money back. But again, now you're paying, and the tenant is basically paying you. The risk is, tenant doesn't pay you, something breaks, something goes wrong, you still run the risk of basically being out of luck in that case, okay? So the idea is, whenever you're running this strategy and you're borrowing money against your current assets, you are putting your current assets in risk in some way. That's the idea. And you are leveraging, so you are creating risk for yourself. So it's not like a risk-free scenario in some case. Now, the next factor, or the next phase, which is basically dying here, okay, is a step-up basis, okay? Because the idea is, well, if I built up a multitude of assets and I want to pass these assets on, for example, to my years, right, my heirs or whatever you want to call them, like, you know, my kids and my wife or whatever, okay? The idea is, okay, it's the step-up basis. So when you actually pass away, the value of your assets are going to be the value of what they're actually worth when you passed away. So the people that are actually inheriting are not actually going to have to pay a bunch of money in taxes. That's pretty cool, honestly, right? So it's basically, I bought this home for $100K, but it appreciated to $1 million. When I died, it was worth $1 million. They inherit it at $1 million and $5,000. They only pay, for example, on the change in value per se, okay? That's it, but they don't have to pay on that whole capital gains of $900,000. That's what the step-up basis basically is. Now, that is a benefit. Now, they could go ahead and basically sell it and not be taxed that much, or just borrow against the asset and continue the cycle. Me personally, guys, all of this sounds pretty clever, right? You buy assets, you borrow against it, you basically go ahead and die eventually, pass everything on to your kids. People don't talk about the risk involved here. And the risk is you're creating leverage. And before you know it, if tenants don't pay you, you have a problem. If the stock market takes a dip, you have a problem. And you might say, well, that's highly unlikely. Not really highly unlikely whatsoever, okay? Now, there are some people that use this method not for buying things, but for actually living, okay? So let's say, for example, I have a salary of about like $40,000, right? $40,000, and I actually want to have a salary of $60,000, right? But I have stocks. I don't want to sell them though, because I don't want to be hit with capital gains tax. So I can actually borrow against it, and I can basically pay back the interest. Now that all depends, right? Because if the stock is actually making me 10% and the interest is less than 10%, right? Then I basically still make a profit in a sense. Right, so that's like, again, you're creating leverage and complexity, and there is risk, because if you have, for example, a pandemic or something crazy happens, then you run the risk of, hey, I'm out of luck, I gotta buy more stock, or for example, they're gonna sell my stock to basically get their money back, and I still owe the money, right? So there's that whole feature thing going on here. So I don't like it, but that's just my personal opinion. Comment down below, let me know, do you like it, do you not like it? I just don't like adding more complexity or borrowing money or getting in, like, taking on unnecessary risks to actually get somewhere. I'd rather just go slow and steady and get there step by step. Okay, comment down below, let me know. And as always, guys, like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified. Up here is another video. Over here is a banger. Long-term team officially out.